welcome to another episode of Plot Mom. Today I am here with the absolutely amazingly talented writer, Jeffrey L Kohanek. I can never pronounce your name. That H always trips me up.
Kohanek.
Kohanek. Thank you very much. He is the author of the Fate of Wizardom series, and we'll be talking a little bit about your books, your writing process, your indie publishing journey, all of it. But before we get into that, let's warm up with a question about wizards, which is specifically, if you could pick a single wizard spell to have in real life, and this is your only one, what would it be?
Tricky. Okay, so one that comes in later in my Fate of Wizardom series, it's actually a secret forbidden spell. It's
Ooh, I love that.
So with compulsion, you can make others do your bidding.
Absolutely. A little bit of evil in there. I like it. I mean, that is absolutely fitting considering we've been deep in villainy. Both Jeffrey and I have just been featured in From the Shadows, an anthology full of villains and evil masterminds. We are going to be celebrating this launch all month long over at Indie Fantasy Attic. So if you're not there on Facebook, you should join us for the fun. We'll talk a little bit more about this later. But let's just get the basics. Tell me a little bit about your books.
Okay. So Fate of Wizardoms is kind of the one we're talking about today. It's my third epic fantasy series. So I write epic fantasy. And it's kind of influenced by the likes of Wheel of Time, which is probably my favorite. Lies of Loch Lamora, because there's some kind of heisty kind of stuff happening. And then Lord of the Rings, it's in everybody's roots. And what I try to do is take a lot of the tropes that people are familiar with, everything from elves to dwarves to magic, etc., and kind of create a world where they had different excuses and a different, for existence, and it all makes sense. It all comes together, all these pieces. So it's kind of like a new way to explain prophecy, for instance. And so I'm taking old tropes and just twisting them in a different way and fit it all together.
I love that. It's one of the things I absolutely adore doing is taking those like disparate things and like kind of like putting a puzzle together, figuring out how to like place them all in so that they actually have internal consistency.
Right.
So, yeah. How did you get started? Like, was it reading all those great books that got you interested in fantasy, or what was like the moment you started writing?
Yeah. So fantasy, I've been into fantasy since I think probably went hardcore into it around 13, 14 after reading the Belgariad. It was one of my favorite series of all time. And it was fun to read it with my kids, 25 years later. Anyway, so, that was a long time ago. So I read many hundreds of books since then, and almost all fantasy. So certainly I've done the studying, right? The research has been done. At the same time, when I was in college, even though I had an engineering degree, I was in the Honor Society, which is an English-focused group. And I did creative writing and study English, et cetera, while doing that. And it was fun, but, engineering pays the bills, writing, not so much at the time. So I did one path. And then when my kids got older, so back in 2014, I kind of went back and said, okay, I'm going to start writing again. And
why not?
2 years later, my first book came out. And, now I have 14 novels and, 7, 8 short stories or like novellas. And, I've got 6 more planned for next year, 6 more novels.
Wow.
So keep going, right? Because I'm having fun.
Exactly. You're never going to work a day in your life, right?
Right.
You're doing something you love.
The greatest part is I was able to leave my day job in January of this year.
Congratulations.
I start earning enough money so I can just do this thing full time and write more. I have so many stories inside it. I just wish I could write faster.
Right? Isn't that the dream that everything that was in your head could just end up on the page immediately when you think it?
Yeah. Maybe that's the magic I need.
Yes, that's the spell. You wasted it. You wasted it on evil. The temptation.
It's all about the temptation.
You're a cautionary tale. So what's your writing process like? You've written all these books. Has it changed significantly since the beginning, or did you like hit a formula early on and just stick with it?
No, I mean, the formula certainly gets refined over time, but now I'm kind of in my groove where I've been doing the same thing for at least 6, 8, 7, 8 books. And it takes me about 8 weeks to get a rough draft and fairly polished thing done. And then a few more weeks to get it ready for my editor. The editor does, she does her thing. Then it goes through proofing. Then it goes through an ARC team. And, basically 6 months from the time I start the book, it's out. But in the meantime, I've already written another one. And then I'm starting a third, right? So I just keep going, and you just have this lag that keeps happening.
Yeah, it's fun. It's that kind of like, this is once the ball is rolling, you start rolling more boulders after it and hope that it doesn't stop because there'll be a pile up.
Right. And because I worked a day job while writing most of these books, that day job involved a lot of travel. So I learned to write on the fly, like in taxis and airports and airplanes and hotels and on a deck in the woods of Argentina and on the balcony of a ship sailing down into the port in what can I think of it? It's not Rome. It's all the waterways in Italy.
Venice.
There you go. Venice. Why did I blank on that? I don't know.
Because you're with an Italian, you were Sarcha.
There you go. So I mean, these are places like I've written all over the world, and because of that, I'm able to just sit down and write even with chaos going on around me. So yeah, it's been good.
Yeah, no, I've done a lot of travel too, and there's something incredibly inspiring. Do you find that like the places you visited make their way into your stories?
Yes. So I hike a lot, and a lot of that stuff gets in there as well. You see a waterfall in Hawaii, or you hike a peak in Colorado, or wherever it is, right? And you're like, okay, well, I understand this. It's easy to write about it because I'm doing it.
Yeah, the thing about, I often read like critical pieces about fantasy and genre fiction saying, well, it's not accurate to real life. It's not, write what you know. It is though, because those little details, they are what you know, and they enter into our writing.
Right. Hey, I even have owned sailboats, so I know how to sail, so I write about that. Oh, granted, they weren't 80, 100 foot long clippers or schooners or something with multiple masts, but I know the basics and I look up the rest.
Yeah. So how do you approach a brand new story? Is it world first, characters first, plot first? Like what's the process like on like granular level?
Okay. Yes. So yes, on all of it. Like that's the trick, is that in fantasy it has to all come together, right? But with my Wisdom series, it started with a character. So in Wheel of Time, I really love, especially after Rowidian, for the people who read it, Matt Cawthon, who's kind of like a rogue character. I love his character a lot. So I'm like, okay, I want to write a story about him as kind of the central character, somebody like him, who's a thief, roguish, kind of arrogant, but snarky, but with a heart of gold hidden beneath it. So that started me off. And then,
there's someone in the audience agrees and apparently is totally in favor of this.
Yeah. It's awesome, right? So, I mean, because you don't see those characters be the lead very often. Usually it's... No,
they're usually the side character.
The overpowered wizard or warrior,
sword wielding big hero type,
or so that was one. And then in order to really fit the story I wanted to tell, I had a diminutive acrobat who is, even though I read this book after I wrote the first book in the Fatal Wisdoms, then I read Six of Crows. I'm like, wow, Inez's just like her, and people see that correlation, but
I mean, It's what I say when I'm teaching all the time is, trope isn't a bad word. When you have a character archetype or a trope that's really wonderful and fun and exciting, why not write it? There's so much variety, even within a very small little character type.
Right. Yeah, so I mean, characters are, to me, the most important piece of the formula, but formula takes, a lot of things are important to it. For instance, a really cool part of the world is the fact that so wizards are this ruling class, and they rule kingdoms called wizardoms. King rules a kingdom, wizard rules a wizardom. So
I've written queendoms.
Okay, there you go. Hearing about a queendom is how I got the idea. I'm like, well, if you can have a queendom, why can't you have a wizardom?
Absolutely.
But and what happens is the person in charge of each wizardom is called a wizard lord, and they're gifted power by a god through a ceremony. This power allows them to live for centuries. And, somebody stabs them with a sword, they can instantly heal. Poison them, they burn it out of their blood, and then boom, they kill you because they're powerful. So the whole premise is you can have a
yes, you can have a fiefdom.
Yeah. So the premise is and these guys, they're kind of trapped in their city though, because they have to sit in this special throne each evening, and all the prayers of the citizens of the kingdom, who are forced to pray to him, right?
Yeah.
They feed his power. And so the power it can wane if you use it over time. But they want that rush. They want that euphoria. So they'll never give up an evening without getting more power.
Of course.
But at the same time, what if you set out to kill one of these guys? Now it's impossible, right? That's actually in this book, the first book in the series. It's a heist story about a team of misfits led by this thief I mentioned, who incidentally became too famous from his exploits and has to go by a fake name.
I love that.
He's fun.
You don't want to get famous as a thief. You want no one to know who you are. That's
right. But, anyway, they set out to kill one of these wizard lords. So it's an assassination plot, but it's kind of the first domino in crazy chaos that happens over the next 5 books. That leads to some massive conclusion where
Speaking of that massive conclusion, so your series is a fate of the world rests in the balance sort of series.
Yes, absolutely.
Your preferred type of fantasy? Is that all you've written? How do you avoid the power creep in those kind of stories?
Those are the stories I write, and yes, you get. What inevitably happens is from the beginning of the story to the end, characters build more powerful, right? They become more powerful. So they're discovering new spells or magical weapons or whatever it is so they can defeat the big baddie, right? Well, the second story ends up being a different kind of story because they're starting at a different level. So I've done this before. I did it with my Asalia books. I had 2 series. The first one, magic is discovered and people now have this power. Generation later, it's common. And now what's different? Well, it's a different plot line and a different story because the world is different.
Gotta say, I love series where they're not static in time, where you do see that evolution of technology, of magical understanding, all of that. I have such a soft spot for that.
Yeah, from my engineering side, it's fun to write that because I get to solve new problems.
Yeah. You get to basically, it's all the good parts of writing fan fiction. You're just writing your own work. Ooh, what happens in the future?
Exactly.
No, all I want is for every great fantasy series to then have a sequel series written for them 500 to 1,000 years later with computers. That is all I want. Forever with everything. But back to yours. Do you have a particular favorite character that you've written? Since you said characters are the big thing for you. Okay.
So among my favorite things between characters is banter. So you get dynamics between them. And so I'm kind of copying out a little bit on this because I've already talked about my thief character. He is probably my favorite character, but what also makes him my favorite is he and his love interest, who happens to be a powerful wizardess who was a princess, right? And it's kind of like the rogue and the princess thing. So it's the Han Solo.
Gotta love it.
It's that.
It's a classic for a reason,
right? Will they? Won't they? Right? Well, eventually they do, and but even afterward, like there's not a lot of dull moments when they're together. So they're fun to write.
Dynamic duos are like, I wrote, I think over the last 2 days, like 5,000 words in this story that just kind of happened. I spent, I think, like 2 months writing the 10,000 story from this freaking anthology, and this just comes out because it's just banter. It's banter between 3 people who have known each other for a long time. It is the easiest writing to do.
Yeah, I find that when I get to heavy dialogue sections, I will write 1,500, 2,000 words in a snap.
Yes.
And then I'll have to start describing something, and you'll slow the story down. I'm like, okay, I have to think about how does this dungeon look? And like
so my first drafts, every time I have to describe something, there's just brackets and then neon yellow say describe the thing here, and I just keep going on with the banter because I cannot be bothered to do those descriptions in my first drafts.
Yeah, it's so funny.
It's always fun. Like there is a pace in writing, and I think everyone finds like the sections that they enjoy the most.
Yeah, action scenes and banter. Those are the 2 things I can write like crazy, and it's all the traveling and describing and minutia between that slows me down.
Yes, for me, it's I can write banter and I can write descriptions of food. That's it. Everything else is slow. Descriptions of food, I can write 5,000 words, and I don't notice I'm doing it. And then my editor is like, no, cut 4,000 of these. It's already 500 too many. Anyways, I have heard rumors of a sequel series to the Fate of Wisdom.
Yes. So I'm writing one. It's called Fall of Wizardoms. So it's kind of like the tail end of what happens in this world. So I'm halfway through the 2nd book right now, and it looks like it'll be 6 books again. So first release in February, 2nd of March, 3rd in April. There'll be a break, and then 3 more. And
exciting.
Then I have to figure out the next thing. I only have 4 ideas, so I have to figure out which one to do.
How has it been, doing this rapid release? Because that seems to be like your business practice of, getting these books out pretty quickly. Is that something you would suggest for new writers to try for, or do you think there is value in like going slow at the beginning and picking up speed? Like, what would you suggest for a new author going into indie publishing?
Yeah, it totally depends on your writing pace. So there are many readers, and especially, my books are in Kindle Unlimited. So I like to feed those readers, and they tend to be voracious. So if I really have a release schedule that's roughly 4 weeks apart, at least for a while, they're like, oh, I can get in and keep going, right? I can at least get somewhat through a series, if not all the way through a series, pretty quickly. But if it takes you 6 months or a year to write a book, you don't want to wait until you have 3 books banked. That's 3 years. It's too long, right? So it totally depends on your pace. And I don't know. For me, one of the nice things is the hardest part of writing a series is laying the groundwork for what happens later. Right?
Yes.
So you have to lay all these seeds. And I kind of have the luxury, because I'll be into the 3rd book before the first one comes out. I have the luxury to go back and say, okay, I have to plan a nugget. Right. I have many of them already planted, but I may come up with other ideas by the time I get farther along.
Absolutely. I'm dealing with that for the first time. I published, I'm writing the sequel now, and I'm just like, oh, I should have put this thing in there. Oops. Now I have to figure out something else. So I absolutely get that. I think that's my next goal, is have several books done in advance, because it can be exciting.
Yeah, I like to include twists in my stories, but I want, while the twist might be shocking at the moment, anytime one comes up, I think it's unfair to the readers if they can't look back and say, oh, you're right, I saw hints of this coming. That makes sense now.
When I'm reading, my favorite moment is figuring out the twist half a page before the character does. Not like 2 chapters or a book before, just that moment before, and I'm just like, and then it's confirmed, and I'm screaming at my poor housemates, and they don't know what's happening because I'm jumping around with a book.
That's awesome. From a writer's perspective, the inverse of that is because I write kind of for my characters' heads, when they do stuff I never expected. Like,
yes.
And then it's better. I'm like, oh, it's so awesome.
Yes.
I'm so glad they thought of that. It wasn't me. It was them.
My characters are way smarter than I am. They do things and like they'll do something at the beginning of the book and I have no idea why they do it. And then like I'm writing the end of the book and I'm like, oh, now I see why you did that. Now that makes sense. Okay, then. Speaking of characters, tell me a little bit about the story you have in the anthology. Tell me about your dark villains.
Okay. Yeah, and this one admittedly is not that dark. So he's a dark elf. So in the world of wizardoms, nobody really knows that dark elves exist because they've been gone for thousands of years. And they actually are living in like an abandoned dwarven city under a mountain, right? And there are reasons for all this, but their society is very much about everybody has a role in society for the betterment of society, right? So that's the way it works. Well, one of them is training to be a warrior called a Letalis, because there are these fissures deep down in the earth that are connected to the city, and monsters come from them. It's also where they have these dark elves have to hunt, and where they find metal, because metal is precious to them. Anyway, he wants to become one of these guys. So, but he is nearing his birthday, his 99th birthday, which is the elves live for a long time.
Yeah.
Anyway, if you cannot pass this test by then, you are relegated to being just a worker. So now you are just laboring, instead of being and he's selfish. He wants to be like a star. Of
course. Who doesn't?
Yeah. So he basically almost makes a deal with the devil. So it's kind of an origin story of how his own selfish desires got him banished. He and some other elves banished from this city and out to the world, the surface world. And some years later, things happen, and this is in the Fall of Wizardom books. He's one of the main villains that are plotting things.
Excellent. To repeat, in case you guys weren't here at the beginning, this is from the Shadows, a villainous anthology with 21 stories from 22 authors. Both of us are there, and it is free as an ebook on Amazon. So,
free.
Yes, free ebook. However, I do suggest the paperback because it can be used as a bludgeoning weapon and can start your descent into villainy.
True.
I think it's very important. One must be villainous for Christmas.
For Christmas.
For Christmas. Yeah. So, how did you decide to indie publish versus the traditional way?
Basically, at the beginning, it was impatience. So, because I figured after I wrote the first book, I'm like, okay, now what do I do with it? I hadn't researched, and I started writing queries and trying to contact Trad Publishing. And after I did some investigation and found out how long the whole process takes, I'm not waiting, a year and a half, 2 years to publish a book. So I bailed on that plan. And actually, I started with a small press, and they helped me learn some things with my first series. But after a few years, I started learning more about the marketing than they knew, and I was helping them. So then finally, I'm like, I'm just going to buy my rights back and do my own thing. And so I've done that since. And honestly, if I hadn't been doing my own thing, I couldn't be living off my author earnings. I wouldn't be making enough.
Yeah. So, no, it's that's definitely the main benefit of being indie published, is that everything is in your control.
Exactly. Yeah, because if I'm not Brandon Sanderson or somebody who's, making big name, making a lot of money. It's pretty hard in trad to get by and without it just being a side gig. And I didn't want to do that.
Yeah, no, you put so much love and time into these books. You want them to be read.
Right. And I want to be able to have time to interact with readers. So I'm on Facebook all the time, and I answer emails, and I send out my newsletters, and I'm all in. I'm not just partially in. I'm not hidden behind some curtain where you can't talk to me.
Yeah. On the other side, what have the challenges of being indie published been?
Well, certainly discoverability for sure, right? So people need to figure out that you as an author or your books even exist. And on Amazon, well, there are millions, literally millions of books. So how do they find you? So you have to figure out a way to get past that. And it requires investing money in marketing, and it requires, building a following over time, and it requires social media presence and all this other stuff. All these things put together to help you, and then putting out more books help you, because the more books you have, the more books that they could discover. Now you're not just 1 in 3 million books, you're 15 or 20 or 50 in 3 million books. So
yeah, absolutely. Numbers count when it's a numbers game.
Yeah.
Do you read a lot of indie, or do you more read traditional?
Well, historically, it's traditional, but I discovered indie probably over the last 4 or 5 years since I've been doing it. And it was probably up until the last year, it was 50-50, but now it's probably 90% indie. That's what I read now.
Yeah, that's what I found as well. As once I started reading indie, I was just like, oh, this is fresh, different.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah, basically, if there's not a trad series I'm already invested in, that I just want the next book, like the next one from Sanderson's Stormlight Archive. Okay, that came out. Yes, I want that one. But otherwise, indies are filling me in, and I can read them. They're fun stories. They're usually different, or maybe they're exactly what I want. Like a lot of times, trad doesn't publish the books I love. You don't see a lot of Wheel of Time books nowadays. They're painting in different areas, and like, wait, I just want what I love. So, and I also, that's what I write. I write what I want to read. And, hopefully there are other people out there that are like me. They're like, I'm not happy with those choices at Barnes & Noble. Oh, wait, this looks good,
Yeah, absolutely. So are there any tropes or settings or anything that are instant, if you see it, you're going to read it? Like your favorite thing in the world to read?
Yeah, that's tricky. I can tell you what, there were decades of my life where I would not buy a book if it didn't have a map in the front of it.
Excellent.
Because to me, that was like, the map means I'm in another world where I can just immerse myself in it, right? So that was a big thing. But if I can find fun, engaging, even quirky characters, that's what draws me in. If I read 25-30% of a book and I'm not invested in at least one character, then I'm out. So, while I love tropes, so I love, magic. I mean, magic is cool. But I can read books without magic, but I can't read books without fun characters, without engaging characters.
I'm right with you. For me, it's sarcasm. If I'm not laughing by 20% at something, I'm out.
Yeah, and sarcasm is tricky in the written word because people can read it wrong. Send a sarcastic text to somebody, and they could take it the wrong way.
It's really true.
Yeah.
So I always kind of start wrapping these up. Obviously, if the audience has any questions, please ask them now. Every author has a project on their far back burner, something ridiculous and wacky that they haven't put the time into, but they've always wanted to write. Do you have anything like that?
I have 4 projects that are on the back burner, so I don't know if they're that ridiculous. Although one is urban fantasy, which I've never written. So
okay, let's hear about it.
Idea. That's a different one. But that's the one you don't want to talk about because it's like, it's secret. It's so secret.
Okay, it's a secret urban fantasy. We're going to look it up at like 2025. Yeah, I'm going to come to your door and be like, hey, Jeff, where's your urban fantasy?
Yeah. I mean, the problem is I have this idea, Rise of Wizardoms, way set in history about how they came to be, right? That's a series. Or I have kind of a fun, almost like Dresden Files kind of series, but in epic fantasy featuring this thief character, Jarrell Landish, and all those exploits that got him so famous. Because I know what they are. Like I've been talking about them long enough or hinting at them, right? So that's a fun series to write. And then, I have my old Asalia books. There's one more trilogy I mean to write to wrap those up. Like I have more, like I said, more ideas than time.
Always. It's always like that, isn't it?
Yeah.
If only we could just squeeze more hours into the day just to write.
Or duplicate myself a few times.
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah.
It'd be so nice to have a conversation with someone who knows exactly what I'm talking about when I'm talking about my books.
Exactly. Can you work on that chapter for me and I'll work on this one and let's get it done.
And then get in arguments because neither of you wants to write that chapter full of descriptions.
I don't want to do that one. I want the banter one.
Exactly. It would end in a fight. Like every duplicate story.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks. Oh, I have one thing to add. Just one.
Yes.
This book, just letting you know, Wizardoms Eye of Obscurance, is currently free on ebook, right? On Amazon worldwide, all Amazon stores. So through December 4th, you can get it free.
Fantastic.
On that, there's a box set that's 99 cents. You can't go wrong there either.
I was actually just about to go into that, which is tell us how to find you, how to support you, how to give you money.
Okay. Yeah, all my books are on Amazon. They're all in Kindle Unlimited. Also, audiobooks. So I'm on Audible, iTunes, and Amazon. I got a wonderful narrator, Travis Baldry, who also did Will White's Cradle series and Beginning After the End and a bunch of other great series. So those are there. And you can find me on my website, which is my name, what you see down here. Wow, it's hard to point. There. Oh, yes. There we go. Right there. So Jeffrey L Kohanek without the period.com. I sell signed copies, ship them out to readers, same price as Amazon, US only. Sorry, shipping's expensive outside of, US.
So very, very much. Yes.
Yeah. And then, hey, I hang out on Facebook all the time. Indie Fantasy Addicts.
Yes.
Join our group if you haven't.
Come join us.
Hey,
we have so much fun. Yes. Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much for being here. I am very excited. I'm going to go get that book. I'm going to read it because my TBR list isn't long enough, clearly, before it topples over and kills me.
I'm with you.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who came on today to watch and support us. If you are wanting to support indie authors and all that, please make sure to shop indie for Christmas. In December is going on, which is a review bingo for indie books. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on in December. It's a lot of fun. I'm going to be talking about a whole bunch of it on this channel. So make sure to like and subscribe, share to get Jeffrey out into the world as much as he, even more than he already is, because he has a million books and they're all amazing and everyone loves them. I've heard nothing but good things about your books. Like,
thank you.
I bow down to you.
Awesome.
Thank you all for coming on tonight and have a happy holiday season in this post-apocalyptic hellscape that we found ourselves in.
Bye.